Now, my first guest tonight is Alex Epstein, who advocates for the expansion of fossil fuels and rejects the scientific consensus on climate change. Alex is the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and Fossil Future, in which he argues for the expanded use of fossil fuels like coal, oil and natural gas. I'm told that Alex is not quite ready to take part in this conversation yet. Ingrid, we can pick up with our shared indignation about the way in which we are browbeaten rather than having our questions entertained in an adult fashion.
But they can browbeat us because they have the money. When I say they, it's the people that are wanting to take control.
We've got Alex.
We've got him. I can't wait to hear him.
Alex joins me now. Hello, Alex. Thank you for joining me once again. We've spoken before.
Yeah, great to be here.
Alex, Sultan Al-Jaber, head of COP28, and his comments about how the retreat from fossil fuels will force the people of the world back into caves. What say you about such a person saying such a thing at such a place and time?
Well, I think the part about the caves is 100% true. The other thing he said is not quite true, but let's talk about the caves part first. So fossil fuels provide 80% of the world's energy. They're still growing. They're growing because they're uniquely cost effective. That's why China has 300 new coal plants in development, more than that, actually. And human beings need energy to use machines to prosper and flourish. And the world needs way more energy. So getting rid of fossil fuels means putting us back in the cave, no question at all. Now, what he said, the other thing he said, though, is we don't need a phase out of fossil fuels to go back to to avoid 1.5 degrees C. But what he's arguing there is that we can keep using fossil fuels and somehow capture all the CO2. This is what he's pretending. And there's no science for this whatsoever. Right now in the US, if you burn $30 worth of coal, we subsidize you $150 to put it underground. That is not a scalable thing. That's not going to happen around the world. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. He's right that this movement wants to send us to the cave, but he's abetting them by pretending that it's compatible with using fossil fuels to be net zero by 2050. Whereas you're totally right. I think you said it was a death wish or death, something like that. That's what it is. Suicide note. That's exactly what it is. And that's the message that needs to be spread. Not that, it's not a suicide note as long as we do my expensive carbon capture. That's BS.
The thing about COP28 that always bothers me is we see thousands of private jets landing in what might arguably be the air conditioning capital of the world, or if not the capital, one of them. How can we take it seriously? You know, when kings and princes quite literally gather to pontificate about how the little people and the poorest people in the world should put up with less, wouldn't it be more credible if, just as a simple starter for 10, they conducted this gathering by video conferencing?
I think it reveals a lot about the nature of their goal, because what they say is, well, this is really important. And what they're recognizing is, to do really important things, you need fossil fuels. And I agree. But I think 8 billion people should be free to do important things, not just the important things that these people think are important. But the other thing that's revealing is they have an argument against the hypocrisy charge, which is right in a certain way. They say, if we fly this distance and use all this private jet fuel, then we're going to stop enough people from using fossil fuels where it'll offset it. But that basically means you're going to kill a lot of people and make them suffer. But that's the whole goal of net zero.
Are there cracks in the climate crisis, the boiling point narrative? You know, if on the one hand you're saying, and we're agreed that the cutting off of fossil fuels puts millions, billions of people back into caves, but that it's you can't have your cake and eat it, and that there are issues that need to be addressed. Is there a way to balance those books and say, can we just take literally the heat out of all this crisis talk?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're seeing this happen in the United States, where some presidential candidates are starting to make a point that I've been making for years, which is that fossil fuels on balance are a climate good. because the energy we get from fossil fuels allows us to protect ourselves from any form of climate imaginable. That's why in the US we can flourish, whether it's polar Alaska or swampy Florida or scorching Arizona. It doesn't matter. So temperature changes don't matter that much. What matters is having the energy to master temperature. The other thing is that in terms of warmth and cold, the world is way too cold for most people. We have far more people dying of cold than of heat. So the only reason this is viewed as a crisis to warm slowly with a lot of energy in a world where far more people die of cold than of heat is just the moral perspective that it's wrong for us to impact things. The idea that the climate that preceded us was somehow perfect and that we're evil change agents that can do no right. That's a primitive anti-human religion.
Bear with me, Alex. That's the anti-humanness. Ingrid, how do you feel hearing that we can regard fossil fuels as a climate good, as Alex says?
It makes absolute sense. Alex, I don't know if you're still there.
Still do.
Alex, I'd like to ask you something. We talk about the cars and all things from the past and aeroplanes and so on, but everything's got much cleaner, hasn't it? Our emissions, our CO2 emissions on all the cars, the aircraft, etc., etc., etc. So I'm even questioning when you put that in context of how it used to be before, when the buildings were black with the soot from the emissions. At what point are we greener now than we were way before?
Yes, do we get credit for that which has been accomplished, Alex, rather than just constantly being beaten over the head?
Well, my perspective, and I talk about this a lot in my book, Fossil Future, is that kind of everything we do with energy improves our environment. The natural environment is not a hospitable place. It's naturally very deficient in resources, and it's very dangerous. And one thing we do with energy is we make ourselves masters of climate. And so we're 50 times safer in terms of deaths than we were 100 years ago from all the climate-related dangers combined. So this is one thing. Now you have to make a distinction between that and pollution. We've drastically reduced pollution because that really, really matters to us. So that's when you're talking about the soot and other things. We have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and I'm totally okay and good with finding alternatives that are cost effective. But we should not be reducing energy at all in a world where far more people need energy. We have 3 billion people using less electricity than a typical US refrigerator. We should not be restricting fossil fuels whatsoever to stop those people from developing.
Such an important point. Alex Epstein, thank you so much. We've spoken before. I'm sure we will speak again, but thanks so much for what you've had to say so far this evening. Masters of climate. That's how we should see ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
The fossil fuels give us the control rather than us being victims.
Yeah.
Welcome back. My next guest this evening is the chairman of E3G, an independent climate change think tank with a global outlook. Tom Burke has dedicated his life to working to combat climate change and says we must act now to get rid of fossil fuels or we will regret it later. Tom joins me now. Thank you for being here again.
Evening, Neil.
The chairman of COP28 suggesting that cutting fossil fuels as you require would put unknown numbers of people back into the dark ages, back into caves. How would you have responded if you had been in the room?
If I'd been in the room, I'd have agreed with him that if that there's a real chance of putting people back into the dark ages and the caves, but only if we don't stop burning fossil fuels. He's got it the wrong way round. The real problem is the kind of destruction that will do to basic food security, water security, all the things that make life safe for us with a changing climate really will mean it won't be quite the dark ages and the caves, but it really will be very bad for people. Do
you accept that the hypothesis or the notion that we are very vulnerable to climate as a species, that 10 times as many people die of cold every year, for example, than die of heat, and that the reliable sources of energy upon which we have depended have made us safer in the face of climate?
Well, I think it was perfectly right for people to do what they did when they didn't know what they now know. So, of course, it's right for people to look after themselves. But we have got lots of better ways to make sure that we can actually do exactly what you're concerned about. Stay safe, stay warm, all of those things we need to do without putting the risk that all of that will be taken away from us.
And by that, do you mean wind, solar.
Yeah, energy efficiency, wind, solar. Yeah.
And you believe that in the Northern Hemisphere, in the winter, for example,
Sure.
we can realistically...
Yeah, absolutely.
Persuade me.
Well, I don't know if I can, Neil. I'm prepared to take on difficult things, but persuading you would be asking a lot.
But persuade me, because it seems
It's
so
really-
much of what I read says it's not realistic to give people reliable energy round the clock.
Put it like this, we won't do it if it's both not affordable and not reliable. Do I think it's both affordable and reliable? Yes, I do. We spend $500 million a year in this country turning off wind power that we've got available in the North Sea because we can't use it, because we haven't built the right grid today.
We can't store it.
Oh, yes, we can. You know what we do to store it? We turn it into hydrogen. And we can use hydrogen, something quite like our existing gas-fired power stations, to cope for those periods when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
There are side effects to splitting water into seawater, for example, to get hydrogen, and it generates massive amounts of chlorine, which is toxic. Is everything in place?
No, I think
to tackle that?
Sorry, Neil, that's not right. When you split water, you get hydrogen and oxygen. Well, no, hopefully, you get the oxygen. We keep it. When you split seawater, when you desalinate water, you're exactly right about that. If you try to desalinize seawater in order to get drinkable water, you create very nasty brine, which is very poisonous and toxic.
To move on a little, when it comes to the predictions of extreme danger, we've heard all of it before, have we not? All my life, I'm 56, and I'm old enough to remember when the modelers said it was going to be an ice age, which didn't happen. And now the successors to the same modelers are saying the world is on the point of catching fire. The melting of no ice at the poles, the loss of the polar bears, none of it's happened. The sea level's rising. None of it's happened. Why should we believe the latest catastrophists?
Well, I'm 77, so I've been around as long as you, and I've been listening to these stories for a bit longer than you have. And nobody's saying the world's going to catch fire. Nobody's saying that.
Boiling point. There's a lot of hyperbole.
Sorry, let me be clear. Some people are saying that, right? They're wacky. There are quite a lot of wacky people talking about this subject, so I'm not surprised that you're going to run into them from time to time. But that's not what the scientists are saying. What the scientists are saying is, if we go on like this and we can track the kind of change, actually quite a lot of them are happening already. We probably put 600 quid onto everybody's bill in this country simply because climate change is making it harder to grow the food we need.
Ingrid, it's very difficult for you and I
know.
Non-scientists.
Yes, exactly. But you've got much more knowledge than I have.
We listen on the one hand to Alex, and then we listen to Tom, and it's poles apart.
Yeah.
How do you and I navigate between these extremes?
Well, it's very difficult, but I have to say, this is the beauty of being able to have an open mind, because I listen to what you say, and I know where I stand on this, sure. But I'm not would never dismiss what you say, and you have your scientific backup. But can I just ask you something? Like the Northwest Passage, that is opening up now, where it wasn't before, where it was completely iced over. But it wasn't before. So this is Sorry,
I've lost where you're going with that.
Well, where I'm going with this is that, you know, the polar melt and everything's melting. The seawater's rising, obviously, which it will do with ice and snow melt. But that has happened before.
Yeah,
we know that.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. It just wasn't civilization wasn't around at the time. We weren't around at the time. That was true. So it has happened.
But it's always actually been. But it's really maintained. And I think I might have mentioned this to you before about Graham Hancock, where he's taken samples deep into the ice. He's got cores, and you can see the oxygen levels, and you can see the balances of the gases and everything, and it hasn't changed. Nature has a wonderful way of doing it. But what about then deforestation? Do you not think if we stop doing that and stop building houses and impermeable surfaces, that is the way really to stop it at root level, and then we can live comfortably side by side with fossil fuels?
It's a bit like taking medicine for diabetes, which is a good idea. So both those things are good things to do. But what you better do is stop actually eating sugar so your diabetes gets worse and worse.
Okay.
Or otherwise you've got a problem. But Neil, you know a bit about this because you're an archaeologist and you know the background. You know we've had civilizations before that have collapsed because the climate went wrong. And all that's different about now is not that something that hasn't happened to civilizations before, but we're causing it.
Climate may arguably have been a factor in in the change, in the success or failure of civilizations. But what about CO2, the great bête noire of the climate crisis? Now, I read a great deal about how rising levels of CO2 are a consequence of a warmer planet, and they're not the driver of the warming of the planet. Is that true?
No. So part of it, sorry, let me be more clear, Neil. It's partly true. In other words, if we warm the planet and the permafrost melts, and the permafrost contains really vegetation that hasn't rotted, basically, and if that vegetation rots, then you'll put even more CO2, so you get a vicious spiral.
But isn't there a lag that it's about 800 years after the planet begins to warm, which it does from time to time, that the cores and the rest show an increase in the presence of CO2? That it would be analogous to looking at a horse and cart from a distance and imagining the cart was pushing the horse, when in fact it's the horse pulling the cart.
If what you're doing is taking a kind of very gigantic view from outer space over the history of the planet, then you will get periods like that. Those are driven by changes in the Earth's angle of in relation to the sun, how it spirals around, changes in geology, so changes in the way of volcanic eruptions. So those things do make change, but they make them on very, very long timetables. What we're talking about is changes that are happening inside my lifetime and your lifetime. And that's different. That's different than anything.
I find myself constantly lost because I just listen to Alex speak, and he speaks persuasively. And then 30 seconds later, I find myself listening to Tom.
I know, and it's so credible on both sides. But my instinct tells me that I don't want to follow you, Tom, although it's completely scientifically backed up, because something just doesn't quite
but I'll tell you what I
fit.
think, listening to Neil, I caught a bit of your monologue before. The bit I understand quite a lot that seems to me to be something that matters to you a lot, which is freedom too. You want people to be free to do things. And I understand that. I like to be free to do things as well. But you can't be free to do anything if you're not free from things that really destroy your possibility for life. And that's the tension in climate change. That's why people can listen to, when they don't know the science, when they're not sure who to trust, all those things with normal human beings. That's at the basis of it, judgment everybody's going to make for themselves. Which is more important, freedom to or freedom from?
No, freedom of choice.
I would say I think my ultimate question to you has to be, is it morally right to imperil the lives of billions alive today, hypothetically to improve the chances of people who don't yet exist sometime in an unknown future?
I have no idea how to answer that. I tell you what, I do think it's morally right. I think it's morally right not to do something today that will mean our children have a good chance to live. I think that would be morally wrong not to do that. And we can do something, because I think climate change, I'm not worried about what happens well after I'm gone, but I am worried about what happens to children, grandchildren, of people alive now, and if we don't solve this problem, their lives will be impaired. And I think it would be morally irresponsible not to do
Tom,
something like that.
I'm going to let you have that last word, because it comes from an honest place. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening.